And the other thing I wanted to say before hopping into the panel is just really to level set us. This is a very we've been dealing with some of this for a while, but it's very present, right, in our faces right now. And so while we won't solve the problem today, this is definitely a step in the right direction. So one is calling the issues what they are, learning from each other about what is being done, and then activating ourselves, our voices, and our own sphere of influence when it comes to ensuring safe and well communities. The flow of the evening will be panelists talking for a bit, but there will also be links that will be dropped in the comments. And so if you have a comment to share, if you have a question, we ask that you fill out the link that is there. Because we have so many people in the room, we won't be able to respond to questions in the chat. But if you fill that out, we do have some folks on our team, on the family and community engagement team, communications, and even some of our students. I want to thank you all for being here, who are really helping to kind of clarify those questions, and I should be able to provide them here real time. So we'll have panelists, we'll have a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll wrap up for next steps. Okay? So next, if we're ready for the panel, I will give brief bio, a few sentences about some of the panelists that we have here. And so bear with me, I will read a bit there. Um, our first panelist is Dallas Gardner from Henrico High School. So he's a student panelist. And panelists, thanks for waving, Dallas. If you're not on screen, please come on screen and wave when I acknowledge you. Dallas is a junior at Henrico High School, and he's a multi-sport athlete, equity ambassador, active member of the YMCA Greater Richmond, National Honor Society student, and a two-time #1 national BMX title holder, which I think is amazing. Um, he is looking to study biology and is pursuing a career in dermatology. And personally, he was a classmate of Diamond Brown and was also a schoolmate of Lucia Bremer. And so Dallas has experienced firsthand the effects of how violence impacts the day-to-day life of his classmates and friends. And so Dallas, thank you for being here with us this evening. We also have Chief, yes. We also have Chief Eric English with the Henrico Police Department. Chief English was sworn in as Henrico County Police Chief September of 2020 and has more than 30 years of law enforcement experience. He really has a community-focused approach with his position and is really known as a community champion, residing in Henrico, having children that have gone through HCPS as well. And one thing that I really appreciate about Chief English is his sharing that we do a lot, but we need to listen to community more. And so, Chief English, we're so glad to have you here with us this evening as well. Also on our panel is Coach Pat with the Easton Boxing Club. He is the co-founder of the Easton Boxing Club and aims to instill in Henrico youth self-determination, discipline, structure, self-control, and self-awareness through programs offered at the Easton Boxing Club. He's a Henrico High School graduate and a Varina District resident, and he's dedicated to providing a safe haven for physical training and mental conditioning that will lay the foundation for conflict resolution. What I love about what Coach Pat does is his work is really a direct reflection of the impacts that he saw of gun violence of young people in his community. And so, Coach Pat, we're so glad to have you here and look forward to having your perspective.
Thank you.
Yes. Also on the panel, we have Liz Parker, HCPS Director of School Counseling Services, Student Support and Wellness. Mrs. Parker's career and desire to support the development of children's social, emotional, and mental health really stems from an African proverb that states, "The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to keep its warmth." Prior to coming to HCPS, Mrs. Parker has served in other school districts and also as a school counselor at the elementary and middle school levels. In addition to her work in HCPS, Mrs. Parker serves as an adjunct professor at Old Dominion University in their Department of Counseling and Human Services. Leslie Velez, HCPS K-12 Intervention Specialist. Mrs. Velez really learned to be innovative in addressing challenging behaviors during a time when there was a suspension freeze during her time in Baltimore City Public Schools. Teaming up with local organizations and community agencies, Ms. Velez sought support to develop mentorship programs to address issues of violence, drugs, and trauma. Mentorship has been at the core of her hard work as she has additionally developed, implemented, and enhanced mentorship programs as a teacher and administrator, first for Chesterfield County Public Schools and now as an intervention specialist for Henrico County. In particular, and we'll talk a little bit later about our Henrico Heroes program, which is a great intervention and prevention approach that we have with really putting our arms around our students in various schools throughout the district. So thank you so much for being here, Mrs. Velez. Last but not least, we have Dr. William Noel, who serves as our HCPS Director of Disciplinary Review, and he's the HCPS Director of Disciplinary Review Hearing Office. All right. In 1993, Dr. Noel started his career in education as a teacher and coach in Caroline County. In 2004, he was in Hanover, but we're grateful to have him with us now here in Henrico County. In his position, he really sees firsthand some of the things that are coming up in school and really sits in this place of helping to mitigate solutions for students that may be showing different behaviors in our school. When asked by a colleague if he was going to miss teaching, he replied that I will always be a teacher, just no longer from the classroom. And so those are our panelists, but I do want to share this is our conversation to have this evening. I'll start with questions to our panelists. And again, if our folks who are supporting back end can just drop the link in the chat. If you have questions or comments, feel free to leave them there. So I would love to start, as I mentioned, we are very student focused. So Dallas, I would love to start with you and getting your perspective. It's been an interesting last 2.5 years or so. I lose track of time a bit with, at the moment, but would love to hear from you just from a student perspective. If you could share what the culture and climate has been like for you in the past school year, and this could be in your school, in your neighborhood or community, and just amongst the places that you frequent. And then I'll add another question to that question. Does it feel different than pre-pandemic, or does it feel about the same for you?
Yeah, sure. So at the beginning of the school year, it felt like a new beginning, kind of like a fresh start. Everybody was excited to come back to school, and it was just good to be back in school after we've been behind the virtual screen for so long. You'll see all your teachers' faces, your teachers from the previous years, your friends, and everybody else that was in your school community. Throughout the school year, however, there was a huge increase in cyberbullying, physical altercations, negative acts such as vandalism, just negative things that stem through social media. And a lot of the social media postings have been negative. Um, so that kind of influenced our school environment, like with the confession pages and whatnot. Um, and also towards the end of the school year, there has been an increase in gun violence. There has been at least 7 guns found on Henrico School property throughout this school year alone. Um, that's definitely not a great thing at all. And Henrico has just been reminded that um, you are no matter how active you are in your school community, anybody can be a victim to gun violence. Gun violence does not pick and choose who is affected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dallas, as you share that, I'm really thinking about, I mean, you're one of thousands of students, but what are you hearing from your peers? What have been the sentiments of some of your peers as all of these different events have been happening?
Yeah, so many of my friends have become desensitized to gun violence as after it has happened once before and before that and before that. So the fact that it has happened more than once in just our community, our small little community, has happened more than once, is kind of traumatic. And you realize that people and students in your community have trauma wherever it stems from the home, the community, the school. They have trauma, and you never know where that trauma can stem from. So even if they seem okay, they may not be okay on the inside. So it's always a good idea to like check up on your friends and just keep up and keep in touch.
Hmm. Yes, thank you for sharing that. I've
Mhm.
shared with panelists that jump in and share insights as you're comfortable. But Liz, I am thinking about you and some things that you've shared about just where our students are, just developmentally, right? Considering the collective trauma that we're dealing with. Could you share a little bit of light there for folks who are here in the room, just to kind of hear and
Sure.
learn, have a bit more perspective?
Absolutely, absolutely. Our students in Henrico County Public Schools and just in the community in general are highly intelligent. But when we think about things that involve really important decision making, I think it's incredibly important to really think about the brains of our kind of 11 to 18 or 19-year-olds as being under construction. And so brains develop from the bottom up. And so that top front part that's responsible for rational thought, thinking through consequences, solving problems, controlling impulses, that part is not fully developed at this time. In fact, it doesn't fully develop until around the age of 25. And trauma further impacts and significantly impacts that development as well. And so we have to be really mindful of the fact that when our adolescents and when our teens are making decisions, they are accessing really the part of the brain that they can, which is that lower part. And that lower part is it's responsible for survival, to be quite honest. It is emotional, it's impulsive, it can be aggressive, and it acts on instinct. So when we are in situations and can only access the part that is emotional, aggressive, and acts on instinct, I think that is why we see some of this decision making occurring. And so, if you've ever had a child or a student that one moment makes a really mature, responsible decision, and then in the next minute does something that you might seem or deem to be illogical or irrational, you are experiencing that brain kind of from the bottom up. And I say this because, based on what we know about brain development, in terms of youth violence prevention, access to guns is particularly dangerous to our adolescents and teens, given where they are in that brain developmental stage.
Thank you for sharing that, Liz. I know for me it was helpful to kind of level set, right? What our young people may be dealing with. I'm curious when I look at some of our panelists from your perspectives, does that click for you, right? Does that seem to be what you're seeing from where you sit in the work that you do?
Yes, if I may jump in right here, it's a perfect segue. So many of the students who I see in discipline hearings, they are just like Ms. Parker was saying, they're operating from that bottom up part of the brain, the aggressive side where they aren't making rational thoughts. So often, I'll ask a student in a hearing, well, so what were you thinking? And they were like, I just blacked out. I don't remember. I was angry. I couldn't think straight. Um, and I get that. However, there are consequences for that to keeping other students safe. So I absolutely understand that we as adults whose frontal lobe should be developed fully would not put students in situations where they have to respond to that bottom part of the brain. One of the things that Dallas said I wanted to address, he said that's, with the influx of violent activity, we become desensitized to it. And that's a sad statement because we do not want this type of behavior to become the new normal. It cannot become the new normal. That's not who we are as a school system. That's not who we are as a commonwealth. That's not who we are as a country. So we need to do something to make sure that we get it back to the community of Henrico the way it used to be. It's not going to be easy, but it's too important not to. So we will have to put the work in, and it's going to take all of us to do it.
Absolutely. I love your sharing that it is, and I keep saying it's ours to solve, right? But it really is the communities to solve. When I think about even still reflecting on your sentiments, Dallas, it's hard to hear, but it's a reality for our young people. You think about all of the intense things that are maybe happening in your school community, in your larger community, and then nationally, right? Nationally throughout the nation, school systems are having these conversations, cities and counties are having these conversations. And so when you think about the magnitude of it, the first thought that comes to mind is, what can I do in my sphere of influence to make a difference? Coach Pat, I go to you at this moment because we invited you to the panel because you're such an important community figure. You're really working from a community-centric approach with your work with the Easton Boxing Club. And so if you could even share a little bit about your work, and then even if you can make any connections to what we've already heard from our panelists.
Yes, how you doing this evening?
Good.
Yes, we started out just doing boxing as far as gloves over guns. We was doing an amateur event for boxing. And then after that, we decided, we wanted to do this annual event where we bring awareness to gun violence and provide resources for the parents that's been affected by gun violence. So we came back and we thought it was more. We have to do more because a lot of times, you do something annually, you have to wait 365 until something else, to the next event. So we put gloves and guns program in place where we teach the kids critical life skills. We deal with anger management. We deal with conflict resolution. Just the other night after our meeting, I got a phone call at 10 o'clock when I got home for a young man that was dealing with conflict, something he seen off social media, and he wanted to react. So I'm giving me a call, and I told him meet me at the gym. And he just took 30 minutes just to come in, hit the bags, and talk. Because a lot of times, if the parents are not listening, a lot of times the kids wants to find another trusted, adult that they can talk to. And so we want to provide that for our kids and make sure that they always somebody there to hear their voice. Because sometimes the parents might not recognize when something get ready to occur.
Yes. And you say it when you talk about being a trusted voice, a trusted face in the community, and having that open door for young people to reach out to you. And you kind of described it, but so what happens if I'm a young person, right, in Henrico,
Okay.
and I'm having a hard time, right? I may be angry about some things. I've got a lot on my mind. How does someone get connected to the movement that you've created? And just how does someone access this outlet that you've created, Coach Pat?
Our doors is open. We just I had a parent call me this evening that had got me information from one of the high schools, and she was dealing with him with a lot of anger, and she got my card. Actually, she got it from Monday night. I got the information, and she ended up giving me a call and coming back to the gym today and talked to me about what was going on with her young man. And we want to make ourselves accessible to a lot of the schools and the community, that we have an open door policy. I don't turn any kids away. If they want to come there and want to relieve, even some of the parents, I think I want to reiterate something that the deputy county manager said before, is a different feeling right now. Back in the 80s and 90s, we was dealing with, it was the capital, the murder capital of, the world of the United States or whatever. And back then, the thing that was different is that the parents, our neighbors could discipline us. They could correct us. And that's not happening now. And so now it's like, hey, you see something, say something. That was implemented well back in the day, and that's not being done now. And I think that's where the parents, I think we have one of the best administrations in the state, and we have some of the best community organizations. We just need the parents to do their part.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Noel, I saw you nodding, and Mrs. Velez, I saw you nodding as well. Any comments that you'd like to offer in response to that?
Is Chief English,
Yes.
save our school. Save our schools. Why do we have to have the police outside of the school?
And if we can mute our microphones, we want to definitely ensure the time for our panelists to speak. And then we'll go into some Q&A. What we've asked individuals to do is to fill out your comments in the link. And really looking to foster a respectful and open dialogue here this evening. So Dr. Noel or Mrs. Velez, anything that you'd like to add in response to what Coach Pat shared?
So with the effort that Coach Patterson is making across the community, I think it's so important because we're allowing students to connect. There is some power behind being able to create a safe space for individuals, a sense of community with individuals where they feel like they have an outlet. I think a lot of what individuals are longing for is that connection, especially since we've been isolated for so long. So the more and more we come together to provide opportunities for essentially mentorship, like what Coach Patterson is doing, like what Henrico Heroes does for our students for Henrico County Public Schools, I think it's just so critical for them now more than ever.
And I'll jump in right there if I may. I agree with Coach Pat as well as Ms. Velez on the fact that our students need an outlet. That COVID year, the lockdown year, if you will, we in the Disciplinary Review Hearing Office anticipated that it would have an impact on discipline. I don't think anybody could have predicted the magnitude it had on discipline. And typically in a normal year, I don't have my first recommendation for expulsion hearing until the end of October, middle of November. Unfortunately, this year I had a recommendation for expulsion hearing the second week of school because it was, so many of the neighborhood issues that had been going on for a year on social media and live actually came back into our buildings once we opened our doors again. So our building administrators, building staff had to deal with that as well as running a school. So once we can get back to, finding other alternatives to the aggression, the trauma that our students are facing, then I think we will definitely see a turnaround.
Absolutely. I think connecting you all's points to Coach Pat's and Chief English, I will get to you here shortly. But what I have really appreciated, even kind of sitting in schools, is understanding that it will take, what does it say, many hands create light work, that it's all of us that have to do this work, right? And so it's not just looking to schools to do it or to county government to do it or even law enforcement to do it. What responsibilities do we all have in kind of rearing and raising our young people, and then even being neighbors, to our fellow adults and parents. And so, Chief English, I'll go to you. Again, another thank you for how you're leading us here in the county. But of course, in the media, we're hearing all kind of reports of just upticks of violence in youth and adults, just across the board. But would be really curious from your perspective, what are you seeing that's happening in the community from a law enforcement perspective?
Well, good afternoon, good evening. And what we have really seen, I would say starting probably summer of last year, you started to see an uptick in violence, again, with adults and juveniles. And what's been really concerning is that you have started to see really an uptick in juvenile violence, gun violence particularly. And a lot of it is that you have kids playing with guns. We've had some accidental shootings where friends have shot one another because they were handling firearms. And then, of course, you've seen, a lot of the violence that have taken place, kids on kids, in terms of some of the homicides we've seen in our county. And so it's very disturbing that, a lot of kids are having access to firearms. Some of these accesses are coming from homes where, I'm saying it's all right to be a gun owner, but you have to be smart in making sure that your kids don't have access to your firearms. And that we've seen that in some of the guns that we've seen at schools, that some of those guns are coming from homes. And so we got to make sure that gun owners are being responsible. And also, we're seeing a lot of the firearms that are stolen out of vehicles. We have individuals that are leaving vehicles unlocked, firearms in vehicles. And again, that's access. And many of times our kids are getting access to these firearms. And unfortunately, some of our kids are not afraid of using firearms. I would tell you we're having a hard time with conflict resolution. And I would tell you most of the violence that we're seeing is not random. These individuals know one another. And it's creating a lot of havoc in our communities, destroying a lot of families. And I just try to get kids to understand, it's not just it's not just you as an individual. As communities are being affected by the gun violence that we're seeing.
Ms. Sims, if I can, I just want to also note, just to support what the chief is sharing, we in Henrico County are a part of a program called Lock and Talk. And it runs through Henrico County Mental Health, Henrico County Area Mental Health and Developmental Services. And we can provide gun locks as well as medication lock bags free of charge to community citizens who inquire about them. And so I did want to note that those resources are available when we talk about limiting access to firearms. We do have a support program in place to support families in locking their firearms as well. So I just wanted to include that in case folks didn't know that was an available resource that we do have here in Henrico.
That's awesome. It's interesting. I just pulled up some of the questions, and thank you all who have already started to submit questions. There should be a link in the chat. We'll drop it again if you don't have it, but I'm getting those. And one of them was from one of the members in the audience, how can we develop firearm safety for the county and also for youth? And so thank you for sharing that, Liz. I know the conversation around accessibility comes up very often. And of course, we're really talking about our youth and what's happening in schools, but we understand that it's broader as well. Chief English, and then Liz as well, since you've been talking and sharing a little bit. We talk about see something, say something, right? But we also know that individuals are not always comfortable with coming forward and with sharing. I wouldn't even say we're over and I'll say snitching culture, right? But sometimes it's a lot of taboo around being the one that's saying it. What are some ways that people can share or give tips and help to keep their community safe without feeling like they're being targeted, right? Or they are, sharing something that may get out that they're a snitch, if I can just use the language that I know our young people are using. What are some things that we have in place to support those folks?
Well, I know when you call 911 and you are reporting something, it's not necessarily that we have to show up at your residence. If you can tell us that you don't want to be seen, but you just want to report something and make sure we come out and address those things. We also have a text line that you can report it that way as well. You can call in, you can report things anonymously. We have several different ways of doing that. And I just want to make sure that people understand the lack of reporting only emboldens those that are out to commit crime. And so we have to make sure that we're not just letting people get comfortable in our communities. Those individuals that want to commit gun violence, once you let them get comfortable and they know you're not going to do anything, they're going to continue to wreak havoc in your community. And so I think it's, as a whole, we all have to step up and do our part.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I said this Monday night, similarly, in the school system, it's the same thing when it comes to bullying or things like that. If you don't tell the administrators or let the administrators know that something's going on, it's not much they can do. And there are absolutely, and I understand in public school, I'm not so naive that I think nothing might not happen, but there are ways that you can get that information to your administrators without talking to them in the middle of the hallway. You have many different ways to get information to them so that the administrators can do something. And you can rest assured, if somebody is bullying you, you're not the only one they're bullying. So the information can come from anywhere. So you have to say something.
To support what Dr. Noel is saying, in Henrico County Public Schools, we utilize a program called Anonymous Alerts. So it is fully possible that students, families, members of the community, anyone really can help one another by submitting reports of concerns. And really those concerns can range from depression, threats against the school, drug and alcohol use, bullying behavior, cyberbullying, strange behaviors that you're just not sure what's going on. Those types of things can all be reported through anonymous alerts. Reports can be sent online. Reports can be sent from a smartphone, a tablet. You can screenshot, video, send anything that you're concerned about. So definitely wanted to share that we as a school system have anonymous alerts for that very purpose, so that you can be comfortable in sharing any information that you have that you have concerns about without fearing that other folks might know that you were the one who shared the information.
Absolutely. And just reinforcing that there's so many ways to connect to make sure that people are aware. I think sometimes, even when you think about bullying, or if you saw something, if others saw it too, sometimes you think, well, it'll handle itself. But take the time to make the call, send the text. I know that we have staff in place who are quickly responding to those things that come through. And so we really do want to encourage each other to just take responsibility for what we see, and and or for what we witness. I do want to remind individuals again, as we're going through the evening, there should be a link in the chat. You can fill that out with your comments and we'll raise them here to the group. We'll continue with the panel, but I am infusing some of the questions that have come up here. And so one question that we had, and this actually came up on Monday evening as well, and I'm looking for it, multitasking here. But have we considered a broader communication strategy for Henrico families around safe gun storage and just crisis preparedness in general? And so I would say the recent events in Texas have really caused us to really think about what things that we have in place. Our safety team at HCPS has been very responsive in working through that. For reasons that I'm sure you all understand, you don't release your emergency safety plan, but just know that it's evolved. I would ask if anyone is in the back end, if we do have a current kind of overall plan that we can share. And one thing that I've talked about with our communications chief, Mrs. Cox, is as we're having these conversations, we want it to go beyond the conversation, right? And so your comments, your questions are important. We're going to create a FAQ of sorts that we can share out with individuals who have participated that may live on our website. If we have your email, we can send that out. But just to make sure that the community is aware a little bit more as we understand that things are heightened, what HCPS has in place to ensure that our young people are safe. Um, Leslie, I'd love to go to you because one thing, and a big reason why we had you on the panel was, we continue to go to just kind of culture and climate. And you were involved with some of our PBIS teams and have gone to several schools throughout our county, elementary, middle, high school. What did you see from from an interventionist perspective as you've kind of traveled through some of our schools amongst our young people and our staff?
Sure. Great question. Because of COVID, because of the fact that students were isolated for so long, we took it upon ourselves to really take some time to walk through, observe what schools are actually already doing. Everyone really took it upon themselves to increase connectedness or sense of belonging within their buildings. And we wanted to see that in action. And so we had various people come to the table, whether it be from a PBIS standpoint or family and community engagement, or school counselors that came to the table to gather those findings, to create a resource of some kind via a video, and then putting together a guide that demonstrates how we can increase that connectedness, because that is what kids are craving right now. And that's why they're making poor decisions, because they don't have the outlet, they don't have that connection. And we know that healthy adult relationships do further positive academic, social, and behavioral outcomes. And so our goal is to increase a sense of community across the district as far as schools are concerned, so we can serve as a resource to one another to be able to share out how to increase those very important touch points on a day-to-day basis, right? Those informal connections. And then for those students who need something a little more intensive, how they can be a part of a mentoring program like Henrico Heroes, so they can get that intensive one-to-one mentorship throughout the course of the year from October to May.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Mrs. Velez. And if you could also just share a little bit, because in the prevention space, what you're doing around mentorship, our thinking is how can we get to our young people faster and earlier, right? To make sure that they feel supported, that they have trusting adults and peers that they can connect with. What are you seeing in Henrico Heroes and some mentorship opportunities that I think are proactively working to keep our young people safe?
Sure thing. So since I've been in this position, we have expanded significantly. One of the things that I had wanted to address when I started in this position was to mentor from a much more preventative standpoint. And that meant that we had to identify students at a younger age. Henrico Heroes started as a prevention effort to reduce the dropout rates and to increase on-time graduation. While that still remains, it's very, very important to identify the students as early as possible so that we can help students transition not only from one grade level to the next, but from elementary to middle and middle to high school. And so we are identifying students as early as uprising third graders. I don't want to go into too many of the details because we could stay here all night, but we know that there is data as early as second grade and second grade reading levels and what that data is used for as it relates to school to prison pipeline. And so my role was to increase the number of students that were being or are being served at that level and follow them as long as possible, because we know that the research says that match longevity is everything. The longer a student is matched with a caring adult, the greater the outcome is going to be. So I encourage people to consider it. Consider mentorship. Like we said, this takes a village, it takes a community. We are steadily scaling the program and looking for individuals who just really have the heart to spend some time with a student on a week-to-week basis.
Awesome.
And Ms. Jones, I'd love to jump in just for a quick second, just to support what Ms. Velez was saying. We talk a lot about trauma and we talk a lot about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. So the collective trauma that we've all experienced was a trauma through the pandemic, through grief and loss. But what we do know and what research tells us is that positive childhood experience can really help to counter the impact of that trauma. And some of those research-based positive childhood experiences include those connections to adults outside of the home, those connections to adults inside the building when it comes to school and other community activities, those mentorships. So I did want to point out that when we talk about the impact of trauma, we also know that there are things that we can do to really help build skill sets, help support students, and help to kind of counter those ACEs and impacts of trauma.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for reiterating that. And, one thing from an engagement perspective, I often say to parents and guardians and just individuals in the community, even if you don't have time to join a formal program such as Henrico Heroes, think about the young people in your sphere of influence. So your child, your nieces, nephews, young people in the neighborhood, checking in on them goes a really long way. And so I think now is about us expanding our capacity for compassion, right? Expanding our ability to reach out, making time for the phone call and or the text message to check on each other. And so again, even if you can't do something that seems a bit more formalized, understand that there's power in reaching out and connecting with our young people. I do want to transition to a different way as I'm looking at questions. Mrs. Flynn, thank you for clarifying in the comments. That is a very different question, so my apologies for not communicating it properly. But her thoughts were really around, is there a communication strategy for gun safety and storage for families? And so we'll take that into consideration. I think it's a great time because a lot of the questions that are coming in are really specifically around gun safety and safety. But if there's an opportunity, I know we have James Braxton, who is here in the room, who works with VDH. VDH has great resources, great people, human capital resources that are working from a public health perspective. And so, Mr. Braxton, I'm going to invite you into the conversation to one, share a little bit about what public health is, but if you can even share your role as our, I believe, gun violence prevention coordinator. If you can share a little bit about what you're seeing, whether for youth or just in the community, it may help with some of the individuals who are in the room.
For sure. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is James Braxton, and I am the Gun Violence Prevention Program Manager for Richmond Henrico Health District. And I'm gonna share in a way that may be a little bit different, for most of you tonight, because I'm not gonna talk from a data standpoint. The data is collected. There are experts on this call that speak to the research, and I'm gonna speak to the piece that's actually missing. And so I'm going to share a little bit about my personal experience, which leads to my perspective. And oftentimes in these conversations, we're missing the perspective of those who are or were perpetrators of gun violence, so we can understand the true root causes of what leads to those choices. And so I, formerly as a young person, was a perpetrator of gun violence. I went through the system. In 2005, I was arrested for attempted robbery, possession of assault-off shotgun, and some other charges. And I spent time in the streets doing what we're trying to stop now. And so I have that perspective. I also have the perspective of working on boots on the ground with the Boys and Girls Club for a number of years in the downtown Newport News area, interfacing with those young people and families, understanding what their issues are. Fast forward, I touched the foster care system. I've touched the juvenile justice system, violence prevention system. Just last year, I spent time in the hospital providing case management to young people and adults who were admitted for gunshot and stab wounds through the hospital-based violence intervention program. And so I have a well-rounded perspective of what the problem is, especially being someone who used to perpetrate it in their own community. And what I can tell you is, especially studying national models around us that have successfully reduced gun violence, the statistics and the data is critical. It is extremely important, and I would never say that it's not, but it only tells us the who, the what, in the when, in the where, but it does not tell us the why. And I think what we're getting to in the work now is going to lead us to the why, which will allow us to create solutions to truly deal with the root cause of these young people are having. And we're there. We know that poverty is a critical issue. We know that mental health is a critical issue. We know that access is a critical issue. But then when we talk about what do young people need, right? And we talk about missing the why, you're going to hear a term called credible messengers. It's work that's happening nationally. It's work that's beginning to happen in Virginia. But these are individuals who have the lived experiences that can build the authentic relationships with young people that we're trying to serve and get them to change their mindset around violence in their community and around even public health and how they fit into that whole picture. And so with the work of credible message, so I'll give you an example. For instance, I'm in DC now studying a model with DYRS and an organization called Association of Concerned Black Men. And this is an organization led by brothers who committed violence in their communities, who did time, who were rehabilitated, who went through skills development training, and now they have created violence-free zones in their district in partnership and collaboration with city law enforcement, with city officials, to create this holistic, plethora of and so, outside of that, we have the
Right now, Alex has got to unmute him.
You went on mute, Mr. Braxton. You may not have realized it, but you went on mute.
Somebody's yelling.
Oh wow, I did not. I was going in. How long was I on mute?
What did we hear? It was a while ago, but you were talking about the program and the model, and I think you were
In
sharing.
DC.
Yes.
Yeah, just essentially the importance of us being able to identify credible messengers from this community that young people will listen to, and they can build the authentic relationship with them to get them to change their perspective about the violence. But yes, it is definitely a public health issue as it impacts where young people and their families live, learn, work, and play, for sure.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that perspective. You said so many things that I may want to come back to, so just stay close by. But I really appreciate you being in this place to share the transformation that you've gone through and now to be on the other end to really be a change agent. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. In connection to that, Chief English, I want to draw you back into the conversation. I can't see everyone who's in the room, but I know my peer, our Lenny, Mr. Pritchard, was also in the room. He oversees some of our work with Courtney Berry with safety in schools. But we've got a few questions that have come in just around safety in schools. I'll read one off and then I'll share what the question is. What additional security measures will be added to the schools next school year to prevent students from being able to get loaded guns into the schools? One resource officer cannot provide the type of security needed to protect our children. So that's one question, but there are a few questions just around, have we explored metal detectors? The use of school resource officers. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity to talk about some of the partnership that happens with our law enforcement, our school resource officers who I'm grateful to say have great rapport and relationships in our schools. And then Mr. Pritchard, if you're still on the call, if you're able to offer just kind of any high level picture about what we've been talking about in the realm of safety.
Yeah, this is Lenny, and I am here.
Okay.
And
You're going to be able to get to Matt Williams' question about the school board. I mean, we can protect them
we're going to
with metal
continue.
detectors.
We're going to continue to hear from Mr. Pritchard. I will continue to share the questions as they come through. But thank you for being here and participating. Mr. Pritchard, if you can continue.
Yes. I know that this question was came up on Monday night at our town hall at Henrico High School, and I know that it's a great opportunity to explore all of our safety practices within our schools and look at all of these things and have continue working with our great partnership with the Henrico County Police Department and look at what we can possibly do. I know that our county manager said this and other people said this, that nothing's off the table and we're looking at everything that we possibly can. I know that when we do look at metal detectors, we are looking at our facilities as a whole and all the access points that we would have to get covered. But, we will continue to monitor all of our safety practices and continue to work with all of our partners. And I think that's the best sums it up the way that it started this whole thing, is that it's going to take all of us to improve this situation.
Thank you.
And let me just follow up with that. We've had some discussions in terms of SROs in schools. Is it adequate, the number of staff that we have there currently? I would just say, we're looking at all of that. But I just want to reiterate the fact that, SROs, 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be, are just one level of security for schools. And as Lenny mentioned, there are multiple layers that need to be put in place in order to make our schools safer. There is not one entity that's going to stop what we're seeing. And so we all got to play a role in this, but we are definitely looking at, where we need to staff SROs. Should there be an increase in SROs or particular schools that we need to be looking at, but also looking at some technology as well in order to help as well. So all those things, like I said, all those things are in place, and there's a lot of items on the table that we'll be discussing and we're trying to make our schools a lot safer.
Awesome. Awesome. Dallas, want to draw you back into the conversation as well. As a student, I think there are a lot of adults trying to figure it out, right? But I know you shared a little bit about what you're experiencing.
Can I ask a question?
I'm curious if there are any
Can I ask a
particular
question?
things that have been supportive for you.
Can I ask a question?
As a student, and if you just give me 1 second, if you're
Someone muted me.
if you can mute your microphone, the procedure that we have in place is that if you have a question or comment, you're more than welcome to drop it in the link that's in the chat. It looks like some people are talking in the chat, so you're more than welcome to do that as well. And what I'll share is that as you are dropping in questions and comments, we have a lot. So we'll do our best to get to what we can. I'm trying to summarize those, but even if it doesn't get said here, we will be sharing these out with the stakeholders on the call. We'll move it to a FAQ and we'll do our best to respond in the way that we can. So if you're not on the panel, if you're not called, if you could please mute your microphone, I greatly appreciate it. So Dallas, really want to hear from you.
Ma'am?
What have been positives for you? What things have helped you as a student in Henrico? You know, and I know you've been impacted through a few different experiences, but what have been some positives for
Guys,
you?
I'm gonna play a typewriter noise.
Yes, so there has been the SSOs and SROs that we do have at our school have been really building positive relationships with the students at our school and making sure that we feel safe. I know we have two at our schools that are always patrolling the walkways, and they just build a relationship with the students personally and make sure that we are in a safe environment and community.
Awesome. James, if I can go back to you because you shared a lot earlier, but I'm thinking about a similar question, but I want to go back to you if you're comfortable, as you share your youth and your experience, right? And you shared being a perpetrator, you know, what were some of the elements going on for you at that time, right? I know clearly there's been a switch, but what was life like for you as a youth? You know, just to kind of give some color and picture to that. Now you being in a transformative state, but if you can share a little bit about that reflection with us, as much as you're comfortable in this setting.
Absolutely. And I'll share what makes sense based on what I see that intersects with the young people I serve and the young people, you know, what I see they're dealing with now. And so the first thing that hit me was, you know, parent separation and restructuring of my family at an early age, which caused me to kind of be lost. We just didn't have that family structure. Led to me getting in trouble in school. There were programs and mentorships in place, much like there is now, but I rejected that, much like you see young people reject it. And a lot of that has to do with it, you know, it might be a great program, but it might not be the right person or people delivering it. And that's why, you know, we want to be intentional with connecting the right mentors or credible messengers, however you want to call it, to these young people. Adapting to a new environment. And so after my parents' divorce, I moved away. But then I ended up getting kicked out of school where I moved to. It's funny because at that school, it was little Mayor LeVar Stoney that went there, and I went to school with his brother. But I got kicked out of school there. And then when I came to school in Hampton, it was the hood. And I began to pick up guns and play with guns because I felt like I had no choice but to adapt to the environment that already has them. And so it went from that to now I'm just engulfed in it because it went from me adapting to now participating. And then, you know, because that was what I learned, now as I grew into a grown man, I'm responsible for taking care of myself. I'm responsible for paying bills. I'm responsible for, and I never took the time to build the skill set or, you know, since I barely graduated from high school, I put myself in a bad position. And so at that point, when my back was against the wall, I
That was a question.
and when young people resort to what they know, that's what happens. And so we got to give them new things.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, I think it just gives a bit of background, and for me, from an engagement perspective, I think about all the different touch points that you have, right, and the environmental factors that come into play. Dr. Noel, you know, you would be an administrator who would be talking to a young James, right? You would be someone that would be talking to some of our youth as they're going through and, you know, and may have made some decisions that will bring them into, say, a discipline. So if you can talk to us about your role and then some of the things that you're seeing, I'd also be interested in you sharing because I know there's been this transformation with our student conduct and even having more restorative approaches to the work that we're doing in Henrico. So if you can just share a little bit about that with folks who are in the room.
Sure, thank you. And I'll start with something that Mr. Braxton said about talking to youth about his past. And I believe it's important, incredibly important, to be transparent with our students, letting them know that we have made poor decisions and we have made mistakes, but it's okay to make a mistake as long as you learn from it. You know, my colleagues know I'm full of quotes, and Nelson Mandela said that I never lose, I either win or learn. So if you learn from your past poor decisions, that's a good thing. One of the things that we do in the disciplinary review hearing office, you know, each year we update the code of student conduct. And about 5 years ago, we did a massive overhaul of it to make it more proactive and preventative, taking away the police language that we had, and we had something called habitual offender in it. And the habitual offender was something that if you did a couple of middle of the road things, you could get referred to the office for a long-term suspension or recommendation for expulsion. And exclusionary practices like suspensions and expulsions, that's a last resort. It should be a last resort. So we put things in place called intervention-focused procedures, where in our schools, the first face-to-face meeting, there must be 2 face-to-face meetings. The first one is led by the assistant principal or the associate principal with the family, the student, school staff that are applicable to the situation. They come up with supports and interventions for the student to help them meet our expectations, because that's our goal. And if the student meets our expectations, then great, then that's our accomplished. But if not, then the second face-to-face is held, led by the principal of the building. You take a look at the interventions and supports already in place and collaborate on the need for more. If the student's behavior meets our expectations, then that's what we want. But if not, at that point, the student could be referred to. We don't want the student to remain in the building, disrupting and taking away the educational opportunities of others. The good thing about Henrico, even if a student is removed from the comprehensive setting, 99% of them will go to an alternative setting where they can continue their education. But they cannot be in a school where they are going to take away the opportunities of others. We try to make, like I said, exclusionary practices an absolute last resort. And going back to what I started with, being transparent, I share with students some of my, poor decisions that led to bad consequences. But I overcame them, and I didn't overcome them on my own. I had support. I had, supportive teachers. I had supportive administrators and friends. And a friend is someone who will tell you, no, that's not a good idea. That's wrong. A friend is not going to tell you, come on, let's do this. Let's skip. Let's go smoke. Let's do whatever. Let's take a gun and go rob somebody. That's not a friend. A friend will tell you, no, that's not a good idea. Let's do something else.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Just to understand from a discipline perspective, the conversations that we're having with our youth, when they are in those situations. I do want to remind each other, and the time always goes so quickly, it's 6:42. So we have a few more minutes together. I can likely share maybe about 2 more questions and comments here. And then we will kind of wrap up our activity, but I do want to set the stage for that. And as always, say thank you to everyone who's been here. There's one question that's come in that I can share a little bit on, and Liz, you may be able to as well. But the question is, does the county have a plan to implement more social emotional supports for our students? And it says especially for those in the East End.
No more social emotional wellness, no more.
I would say countywide. Okay, thank you for that. I would say countywide, we have absolutely been focused on the wellness of our young people. It's something that's important. Before they're expected to learn, we have to make sure that they're grounded. Henrico has been committed to a community schools approach, which really brings in partnerships, brings in collaborative leadership and collective impact, which is really what you're seeing here today, through this town hall and through this community conversation. It brings in additional supports and activities in schools. So there's some expanded learning time, whether before, after, or even on the weekends. And so, what we do in family and community engagement is really centered there, but we work with our folks across various divisions. And I think about the work that you're doing, Mrs. Parker, through counseling and, student support and wellness and things of the sort. Anything else that you would like to add, Mrs. Parker, when we're talking about some of the SEL?
Handwritten document that was sent to my family.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Please mute.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer that. So we, from the school division perspective, we absolutely recognize the need for additional mental health support for our students. And so it just within the past year, we have increased our counseling support by over 24%. in our buildings and then continue to do so into the next school year. We also added 21 additional student support and wellness positions for the next school year, which will include school psychologists, school social workers, and are just working really hard to increase our staff that we have available for students so that they are available for students who may need additional support. So working to
You need to
increase
start
those
disciplining
staff
these little
members,
skips.
working to increase their capacity to work with students, working to increase access for students so that they can see their counselors often, so that they can see a school psychologist if they need to, or a school social worker. So really just working hard to build our school-based mental health model. And then also really this year, we've seen significant increases in our partnership with Henrico Area Mental Health as well. Each of our schools has a mental health liaison. And so with that and CREST services, just really trying to support our students all of our students, but also our students who maybe need more intensive layers of support than some of our others. So just continuing to emphasize school-based mental health, partnerships with community-based mental health, identifying students, working with Dr. Noel's team to identify students and families who may need that additional support, and then trying to make those connections and assist and support them with accessing that connection has really been a priority of ours.
Awesome. We're about 15 minutes out, so we're going to do about 2 more things. Panelists, want to give you all an opportunity just to give some kind of wrap up or closing. If there's one thing that you would share to students who may be on the call, community members who are on the call, just one word or piece of advice or just a word that you will share there. We'll then go to one of our counselors who work in our schools to kind of walk us through an activity that we're doing with our young people around mindfulness, a mindfulness moment, and we'll do that. But if we can start with our panelists, Liz, I'll go back to you since you just recently started, and then panelists, you all can just jump in to add just a statement or two as we wrap up for the evening.
Yeah, absolutely. I just like to share that our students are in need. We know that. And so I would like to speak directly to any of Henrico County's youth, our students that are on this evening. First of all, thank you for your involvement and for being a part of this conversation. Your voices are often overlooked in these conversations. They're typically full of adults. And I so appreciate your willingness to join this evening. I want you to continue using your voice. And for our students who may be struggling, I just want you to know it is okay not to be okay. There's been a lot of things that have been going on. We've had a lot of exposure to trauma, especially grief and loss. If you've lost a classmate, if you've lost a loved one, that is as one student I worked with told me, that is a really heavy, heavy thing. And even if you weren't directly connected to someone, just knowing that this happens in our community is an incredibly, incredibly heavy thing. So if you are feeling like you need additional support, please, please reach out. There are people here in our buildings every day that are here to support you. If you have a friend who's come to you and shared that they might need some help or have shared things that are concerning, please, please reach out so that we can connect with them. We have people in place. Sometimes the hardest piece is identifying students who need that support, because we know they're much more likely to go to their friends than they are to come to an adult, typically in the school setting for help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ms. Velez, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Just following up to what Liz was just saying, it's so hard sometimes, for us to get people to kind of seek the resources, right? And we want individuals to reach out and access those resources. I'd like to charge everyone on this call to reach in, whether you're an adult, whether you're a friend, doesn't matter who you are. If you see someone that's in need of something, you take the initiative and go in and be a resource and take an individual to where they can access some resources. Sometimes people need someone to just just take their hand and walk alongside them. So I just encourage everyone to think through that.
Thank you. Chief English, if you would like to share a few words.
I would just say to the families to be involved in your kids' social media platforms. There's a lot of postings that are going out that are very disturbing. And if you start to see a change in your child's behavior, they could be acting one way at home with you and posting things that you may not be aware of. So I would say to parents, just really be engaged in that part of your child's life, because there's a lot of folks that we come across, parents that just didn't realize their kids were posting certain items on social media. And that begins a lot of the issues that we're seeing in our communities. So just stay engaged, and we have to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chief English. Dr. Noel.
All right, well, there's a African proverb that says, when enough spider webs unite, they're strong enough to tie up a lion. So if you look at the police force as a single spider web, the school system as a single spider web, families a single spider web, the community single spider web, we're not strong enough to tie up a lion. But if we all connect and join forces, we are strong enough to tie up a lion, whatever that line may be: poverty, abusiveness, in our case, we're talking about right now, gun violence. If we all join together, I do believe we're strong enough to make sure that we can curb, if not stop, the violence that we're seeing in our communities. And that is what I'm hopeful that we can do. And thank you all for participating tonight.
Absolutely. Coach Pat, if you would like to share a few words.
Yes. One of the things I want to talk to the parents about, kind of decreasing some of the idle time, getting the kids involved in other activities. That would help a lot. There's other, go to the county. The county is real good about putting out information out there on extracurricular activities. And I know what idle time did for me as a youth, as Mr. Braxton was talking about earlier. You got yourself in a lot of trouble when you had that idle time, especially if you're coming from a single family house and, parent working multiple jobs. So the biggest thing as far as getting these kids and knowing there's other positive outlets out here for these kids. And saying that, we do have August 27th, we will be having our Gloves Over Guns boxing event that we partner with the county, Henrico. Tentative date is August 27th, and we're just waiting on confirmation. It will be an outside event, and we're hoping to be able to have everyone, as far as on the board, attend to provide resources for the community.
Thank you so much, Coach Pat, for that. I look forward to the event as well, and thank you for being on the panel.
Thank you.
Last but not least, for panelists, Dallas, if you have something that you would like to share.
Yes, so I would like to say that, just as I said early in the meeting, that it is very important for the adults in the community to check in with the youth. And getting a call or a text or even just a conversation in person is very important and refreshing. And it's more important than you may think, because that student, that youth would reflect on that throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, and they'll remember it more than you think. So just check in with your youth and make sure that they're okay on a daily basis.
Awesome. I will share as moderator, and I think I may have said it earlier. I really feel like right now it's a call for compassion, and for us to extend deeper compassion for one another. If you think about someone, call them. Even if you haven't talked to them in a while, stop by a neighbor's house, check on your loved ones, in particular our young people. They are experiencing things that I don't think we could even imagine. Even though we dealt with a little bit, at their age, but they are really dealing with life in a really different way. And so let's go a bit deeper than I had a good day, I'm fine. Let's go a little bit deeper with our young people and show some compassion for where they are. We're going to wrap up this evening with one of our counselors at Greenwood, Mrs. Holly Keelig. I hope that I said your name properly, Holly. But one thing that came up on Monday night was just mindfulness practices. What are we doing in schools for our young people? And so she'll lead us through one of those activities. Before we go to her, I do just want to give another big round of thank yous, not only to our panelists, but for those of you all who have been here on the call, have engaged in conversation and thought, who have provided questions and comments. Please know that we, as I shared earlier, will move this to a living document, FAQs and responses. There's a lot that's happening in the community that we just want others to be aware of. There's a working group, as was shared earlier, that several entities are involved in. Much appreciation for our county manager, for our superintendent, for our chief of police, for really taking a community-centric and collaborative approach to finding the solutions that we need. These conversations are happening nationally, and I'm just grateful that Henrico is taking a stand and having them publicly. But just know that this does not fall on deaf ears, and that we will move this forward and continue to activate solutions. And so with that, Holly, I'd love to pass it to you to walk us through a mindfulness moment as we wrap up this evening.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. I'm so grateful to be with all of you tonight as we discuss this incredibly important topic. And as we close out our time together, I would like to lead us in a mindful moment that allows us to give attention to everything that we've discussed and felt tonight, and to mindfully transition into our next space when this meeting ends. I do mindful minutes at the elementary level every single day with our kids. Mindfulness is such an amazing practice that helps you become aware of the emotions you're feeling and to honor those feelings without judgment. And it also allows us to become calm and centered and to find an inner peace. And so this is something that I would love to share with you all tonight. This is something you can do with your own children, and I encourage you to do so. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to have you sit comfortably. And of course, this is optional, but I would love for you to participate. The very first thing I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you pretend that you have a balloon in your belly. We are going to practice proper belly breathing. A lot of us tend to do Superman breathing, where we breathe through our chest, but we want to do nice belly breathing. So pretend you have balloon in your stomach. You're going to take one hand, put it on your chest, take your other hand and place it right above your belly button. And I'm going to have you breathe in very slowly through your nose, like you're smelling a flower. So nice big deep breath in through your nose. And I want you to fill that balloon in your belly with air, not in your chest, but in your belly, right? Big deep breath in through your nose. Blowing up that balloon. Hold your breath for about 3 seconds. And then I want you to slowly exhale through your mouth, almost like you're blowing out a candle. Let's try that one more time, a little bit more fluid. Big deep breath in through your nose, nice and slow. Hold it. And slowly exhale. And during this process, if you'd like, maybe think of an intention that you have, a wish, a hope, a feeling to honor everything that we talked about tonight, so that we feel grounded and able to close out our space and move into the next thing that we have to do. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Perfect closing to our evening together. Thank you all again so much for being here. Again, there will be follow-up to this evening, but we just really appreciate your presence this evening as we move forward with solutions and activating better outcomes for our youth. Have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Thank y'all for letting my daughter speak. Thank y'all.
Thank you,
Oh,
sir.
Kimari is
Wonderful. I love y'all. Thank
amazing.
y'all. Have a
Oh,
great weekend.
thank you. You too.
Y'all welcome.
Yes.
So are we having any question answer time, like you said?
No, the Q&A was through the link, and so we asked people to drop any questions or comments there. It's still in the link if there is something that you want to share with us. And again, the questions, comments will not sit idle. We'll be going through a process of trying to deem them out, provide some responses out. So
Yeah.
hopefully by next week, we will have a Q&A, FAQ for that to respond to that.
And some kind of a solution to all this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Complex solutions. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye-bye.